today and welcome. You can go ahead and share your screen. Oh, Mark, we can't hear you. You're muted.
It's great to be with you today, and now we have all the buttons turned on, and hopefully they'll continue to work. So it's great to be with you and talk about branding. Infinity Concepts is a brand communication agency. We've been around for over 20 years and work with organizations across the United States and around the world. And what we find is that when you discuss branding and when you get branding done correctly, the messaging is right, and then everything else seems to flow out of that. So today I want to share with you some thoughts and insights and some practical help to encourage you and to help you develop an accurate expression of your brand. And so this will be a fast-paced seminar. We're going through a lot of material very quickly, but again, you'll have the ability to download the notes and basically a copy of the PowerPoint so that you can review this at your leisure. And certainly you can follow up with us at Infinity Concepts if you have any additional questions. So with that being said, let's share the screen, and I'm going to start with our presentation now. Hopefully, there we go. And I believe you can see branding from the inside out. That's what we're talking about right now. And I'm going to just make one small adjustment here. All right. And maybe two small adjustments. There it is. So the first question is, what is branding? There's a lot of misconception about that. People don't fully understand it. They say, surely it must be a logo, or it must be a color palette, or it must be the fonts, but it's none of those things. And to kind of start the conversation off, I'm going to show just a brief video that'll help kind of frame the direction we're going. So let's watch this together.
Why won't anyone buy my lemonade? It's the best ever.
I'm glad you asked, Jimmy. Otherwise, I'd be standing here with this microphone and script for no apparent reason.
Where are you, mister?
My current location is unimportant, Jimmy.
Okay, mister. Want to buy some lemonade?
Well, no, I don't, Jimmy. I'm afraid your lemonade point of purchase branding is simply unappealing, undefined, and quite easy to ignore.
Ah, shucks. Hey, mister?
Yes, James?
What's branding?
Now there's an intelligent question, a question more business people like yourself should be asking, and I'm just the disembodied voice to tell you.
Sorry, I'm lucky.
Why, yes, you are, Jimmy.
So, what is branding?
Jimmy, branding is the art and science of defining and differentiating yourself to the public.
Oh, like a cool logo?
Not so fast, fella. There's a big difference between an identity and a brand.
No fooling?
No question, my young beverage entrepreneur. Logos and graphics are merely the trappings and window dressings of a brand. Sure, they need to be top-notch.
And swell?
That's right, All-Star. But more importantly, a brand defines the foundation of a company. It's your core beliefs, it's your voice, it's your company's purpose in life. Let's look at Joe and Bob. Both have a purpose in life. Joe is a farmer. His purpose is to raise grain and livestock to provide food. It's a tough, dirty job with lots of challenges. His identity not only reflects his purpose, but protects and equips him to get the job done right. Now, Bob is a doctor. His purpose is to care for people when they get sick. He needs to be in a sterile, germ-free environment, and his identity must conform to that environment. His clean and flexible identity allows him the tools to fulfill his purpose. Both Joe and Bob have distinct purposes, and both have unique, appropriate identities that align with those purposes to create unique, important individuals. Businesses work the same way. A business must know who it is, what it does, its foundation, its purpose in life. That's branding. Once a business knows its brand, then all identity and marketing will be built upon that brand.
Jeepers!
Jeepers indeed, sporty sport. Branding is the foundation to every successful business endeavor.
Like my lemonade stand?
Exactly, my citrus-happy friend. So remember, Big J, branding is you with intent and clarity at every customer contact point. It is the purpose that drives your business. Now you're branding, Lemony Snicket. My work here is done.
Thanks, mister.
My pleasure, Jimmy the Squeeze. My pleasure.
So we see as we take a look at that fun little video that there's a big difference between identity and branding. And so we want to focus on the brand today. The identity includes the logo and graphics and the packaging of your organization, your ministry. But we want to go deeper than that. The brand is your core beliefs, your voice, your purpose in life, the reason why you exist. What has God called you to do? That's all connected to the heart of your brand. It's the perceived emotional corporate image of your organization as a whole, where the identity then creates some visual aspects to define that brand, and then the logo shows the simplest form of that expression. But it all goes back to the brand is intent and clarity at every customer contact point. Let's pause there just for a minute. A brand is being intentional and being clear wherever your organization and the public intersect. We call those branding points. And so every time that your organization touches a member of the public, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a donor, whether it's someone who is receiving services, there should be an identity, a brand identity that is communicated, that is consistent and intentional and clear every step of the way. So the branding question is this. I want everyone to think about this for just a moment. What do people think of when they think of you? What do people think of when they think of your organization? What's the first thing that comes to their mind? I often talk about branding being like a cup of coffee, because I'm a coffee lover. I like coffee, all kinds of flavors, all kinds of different roasts and brands, and I just love coffee. And so I can tell a really good cup of coffee when I smell it, when I sip it. I can tell that it's pure, it's quality, and I enjoy it very much. But now what if we took that cup and we had a little coffee in the bottom, but to that coffee we added some lemons and lemonade, some orange juice, some Pepsi, some 7-Up, some tea, other things. Now the flavor of that coffee is no longer what I expected it to be. And oftentimes a brand experience is like that cup that is filled with a lot of different flavors, because the brand is an expression of the experiences people have with your organization. If those experiences are consistent, it's coffee, 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 coffee. People know what to expect. But if in one case they taste it and it's coffee, and another they taste like something else, then that brand is unclear. And oftentimes organizations that are not intentional and are not clear create mixed messages in their branding, not intentionally, but unintentionally. And that diminishes the ability for that brand to communicate and to effectively be funded for the work God's called them to do. Branding is the container for each individual's experience with your organization. It has to be a consistent experience over and over and over again. It's the collection of emotions and experiences that they equate with your organization. It's the unique essence that sets you apart from others who may be doing similar work. It's the promise that you will always keep, and it's your organization's ultimate asset. I built our whole agency 20 years ago. I established our whole agency based on brand communications, because I believe then and I believe now that if you get the brand expressed correctly, fundraising messaging flows, communication messaging flows, ministry messaging flows. Everything will flow out of a well-constructed, well-messaged brand. Here's a quote from Professor Kumar from London Business School. Branding is not merely about differentiating products. It's about striking emotional chords with consumers. It's about cultivating identity, attachment, and trust to inspire loyalty, customer loyalty in this case, but the branding principles for business apply for ministry as well. You want to build an emotional connection and cultivates identity, attachment, and trust. That brand is the mental model established over time that represents what people feel, think, and say about a product, service, or company. So what do people think of when they think of your organization? That's your brand. A strong brand must be intentional. It doesn't happen on its own. I've never known a really great brand to happen automatically. It's always been something that is thoughtful and crafted and intentional. It needs to be memorable, something that people can walk away and say, oh, I understand. That's where clarity comes in. It needs to be consistent. The brand that changes and changes and changes and changes is never remembered and never strong. The brand that is consistent over time is the one that people will remember and trust and believe in. And most of all, it has to be true. Has to be true. So let's take a look at each of these just very quickly. Brand must be intentional. If you don't intentionally define your brand, it won't be correct. It will change. It will be uncertain, and it will be confusing. I have a picture of Mr. Rogers on the screen. Oh, it can't hurt you, because Mr. Rogers defined a very clear brand. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but it was very clear he was intentional about everything he did. The way he put on his sweater, the way he put on his shoes, the way he ran the program was all very intentional to communicate a brand with clarity and intentionality. Your brand must be intentional. A brand must be memorable. Brands are built in people's hearts and minds, and it's connected to an emotional associative memory. There has to be an anchor that says, oh, I remember them. I know what that's all about. And building that anchor is very, very, very important. And a brand must be consistent over time. It requires consistency over time, which means there's frequency and repetition. And just as you think people are tired of hearing about who you are and what you do and what your brand's about, they're just starting to get it. I can assure you of that, because people need to hear it over time, again and again and again. And most importantly, a brand must be true. If your brand is not genuine, you lose authenticity, you lose credibility, and ultimately you'll lose support. So when you craft a brand, you have to make sure that you can live up to that brand promise every time. So what you need to know is that branding will always happen. If you're not doing branding, it doesn't mean you're not branded, but branding will always happen. It might happen that it's poor branding, because the greatest enemy of strong branding is lack of intentionality, and then you're branded by whatever happens to happen. So good branding requires planning, it requires commitment, it takes time, and it costs money. And not every organization is willing to make that commitment. But if you do, it will transform your organization. I can assure you of that. After working with hundreds of ministries over 20 years, I can tell you that when you get your brand message expressed correctly, it is transformational in terms of your communication. It's transformational in terms of your donor engagement. It's transformational in terms of your ability to communicate the things that are important that God is placing at your disposal. So it requires planning, it requires commitment, it takes time, and it costs money, but it's worth the investment of all four of those things. But you have to understand that branding must develop from the inside out. You can't just say, I choose a brand. The brand has to come from who you are inside, what the calling is that God's given you, what's the purpose that God has established in your heart. Good branding requires that careful planning and deliberate execution and responsible stewardship and consistency over time. I'm reiterating that because it's so easy to just say, oh, we'll let it be what it is. But good branding requires, you have to be careful, you have to be intentional, have to be deliberate, and you have to do it in a way that is consistent over time. So the big question is, where do we start? Now that we know that that's what's required, we know that it have to be intentional, we have to be clear, we have to be consistent. Where do we get started? How do we develop a brand? How do we find our brand? Well, the first is by defining your core purpose. And surprisingly, that has, over the years, we found that that is actually harder than you would think. We want to pour down and drill down into that, the core purpose. What's the foundational intention of your organization? What's your compelling motivation? The reason why you do what you do, the philosophical heartbeat that's at the core. And that should be able to be something that is summed up in one simple, memorable statement. And until you can do that, you're going to have a hard time developing a brand that's going to be effective for you. But when you can define your core purpose and in a way that sets you apart, what is it that makes you unique? What is that unique calling, the unique assignment that God has given to you? When you understand that, when you articulate it, when you get a hold of it, that gives you the beginnings of what you need. It's God's assignment for your organization, and that's the key. What is his assignment? Then, what are your core values? Now that you understand what the assignment is, the thing that God's called you to do, that core statement, now how does he want you to do it? Your values are the things that guide your internal conduct as well as your relationship with the external world. They're deeply held beliefs that guide your decisions. It's the desired culture of your organization. We have a list of some principles here. Core values, we say, are always constant. They're always passionate. They're always essential. They're always cultural within your organization, and they're non-negotiable. So if you think about what might be your values, and oftentimes we do this exercise with our client, we'll put a lot of words on the board and have people choose, and we come up with a long list of what are perceived values. But if a value is able to be disregarded at some point, then it's not really a value, it's a preference. So we want to hone down to a small group of values, 3 to 5 values is what we prefer, that are constant, that will always be true no matter what. That's something you feel passionately about, something that are essential for who you are and your identity, something that's integrated into the culture, the way you think, the way you feel, the way that you are passionate about, and they are non-negotiables. That if you can't live out that value, then that would be something that would be a non-starter for you. Values have to have those 5 components, but when they do, and when you define them, this is the second building block to a strong and clear and articulated brand. The third piece is what we call brand essence. Brand essence is a little bit more about the messaging, and the messaging is built around the brand essence. And so we have 4 components that you look at for a brand essence. First, what are the services or products that you provide? What is it that you are delivering that in fulfillment of the purpose that God's called you to fulfill, in fulfillment of the assignment that God has given you? What are the services that you're delivering? Secondly, what are the human qualities or personality with which you're delivering those services? Are you a compassionate, caring, sensitive organization? Are you a dynamic, cutting edge, pioneering organization? So there's some different human personality traits that would change the dynamics of who you might be. Thirdly, what are the brand distinctives? What sets you apart? What are the things you do differently than anyone else? What are the things you do better than other people? What are the things that make you one of a kind? Those are the distinctives. That's part of that brand essence that needs to be developed. What are the brand benefits? Now, this is not what you do. This is what happens to people. What benefits do people experience as a result of what you do? So because of your core purpose, because of the values in your organization, because of the services and the personality with which you provide them, and because of the distinctives that set you apart, what happens in people's lives? What are the benefits that people experience? So this is the third set of building blocks to this core of understanding and building that brand from the inside out. And then the fourth piece is the product category. This is perhaps a little different thinking for ministries, but I want to really challenge you with this. Product category is a group of products, brands, or organizations that offer the same general functionality. And for this workshop today, I think probably everyone is involved in evangelism and in reaching out to people through winning them to Christ, and that's part of what your commonality is. But within that, there's also subcategories. And I want you to think about understanding your position. Your position is the place that a brand occupies in the mind of its audience and how it's distinguished from others. So if I think about fast food restaurants, I might think about Burger King or McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, and those are all fast food restaurants, but they have unique places in my understanding. So that's the positioning that they have. Second piece is mind share. Mind share is the amount of mental real estate that your organization owns in the public's mind within that product category. So you can determine your positioning. It's the process of making your organization the one people think of first and feel best about in your specific product category. If I were to ask you, what's the number one, what's a cola that you would drink? We saw earlier Coke. One of the graphics was Coca-Cola. So that you might say Coca-Cola. So what's a second? Then you might say Pepsi. If I asked you for a third, whenever I do this in a room full of people, there's always a lot of ambiguity because there's no clear third. You're either the leader or the follower, and then there's everyone else. Several years ago, a number of years ago now, there was another soft drink that understood that dynamic, and it was called 7-Up. And they said, we can't compete in the cola because we already have a leader and a follower. So let's create a new category. And they created the Uncola, a new product category. Who's the Uncola? The number one is 7-Up. The number two is Sprite. Who's number three? Well, there's a whole bunch of them out there. But again, it's the leader, the follower, and then all the rest. And so oftentimes, by creating a very clear, distinct, unique product category, you can position your organization in people's minds in a way that has never been there before. And that's part of the branding process as well. Let me run through a little exercise with you. When I say coffee shop, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Probably Starbucks. If I say fast food, probably McDonald's. If I say online search, it's probably Google. If I say overnight delivery, it's probably FedEx. Online retailer, almost definitely Amazon would come to mind. Athletic sportswear, typically it's Nike. Now, why was I able to do that? And I don't know if I was 100% accurate, but I would guess I was pretty close. It's because these are all the product leaders in their categories. They are the ones who have the greatest mind share, the greatest positioning. Well, just think if your organization could have that kind of immediate recognition within your product category. Isn't that a powerful concept? That's part of building the brand from the inside out. Then you want to develop your brand promise. The brand promise is an unfaltering promise that an organization makes to its customers, its stakeholders, and the public. It has to be something that is accurate, something you can live out, and something that is always true. And it's something that you have to craft the brand experience. I'm using Walt Disney World because Walt Disney is one of the most extraordinary branding companies, whether you like Disney or not. That's another conversation. But in terms of branding, they are some of the best. And they create an extraordinary brand experience. And it's the intersection of the compelling brand promise with what people experience personally. Michael Eisner, former head of Disney, said a brand is a living entity. It's enriched or undermined cumulatively over time. It's the product of 1,000 small gestures. So first of all, I want to just drill down on his comment because it's so rich. It's a living entity. Brands can change. You have to make sure that you are managing that brand day by day by day to make sure that your brand is consistent. It's not drifting, it's not changing, it's not being co-opted, but your brand is alive and thriving. Secondly, it's enriched or undermined over time. It requires consistency over time because of the experiences people have. If the experiences are consistent, coffee, 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 then it's enriched. If the experiences are diverse, then it's undermined because they are not consistent over time. And it's the product of 1,000 small gestures. It's the little things that help define clarity in the brand. All of those branding points. Remember, we talked about its intentionality and clarity wherever your organization touches the public. When it's done well, you move from branding into bonding. When done properly, branding makes people feel connected to you in an amazing way. We call that bonding. The personality you craft for your brand is essential to that branding process. And the bonding creates community. It creates relationship, creates a surrogate family, connectedness, a sense of belonging. It's beyond just liking a product. It's becoming an advocate for that product. And that happens through 1,000 small gestures, through branding points. And finally, we're coming to this. A branding point is any place where your brand touches people, the staff, the community, customers, donors, advertisers, prospects, anyone. And those branding points are very diverse. Let me kind of give a quick brush here. It could be the way you answer the telephone. It could be what your website says, the emails you send, your social media posts, digital marketing, video, your presence at conferences, publications, e-commerce, broadcast, print, the affiliations your organization is related to, your public relations, content. These are just a few of the branding points that we begin. We have a whole long sheet of branding points that we work through with our clients to help make sure that that message is consistent, consistent, consistent. It takes work, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, it takes an investment of both time and resources. Told you we were running quickly, and we are. Branding requires sacrifice. Al Reese was one of the pioneers in marketing and branding with product marketing, Procter & Gamble and so forth. And he said, if there's no sacrifice, there's no branding strategy, because you have to make a commitment in order to make it happen. Branding requires sacrifice. And then once you are branded, then you can move from branding to identity. You recognize this from earlier. The brand is the heart. And then out of the heart, you can find the identity. That's that brand essence we were talking about. And then out of that comes the things like logo and the fonts and the expression. And those are all very, very important, but they come out of understanding the heart of that. And so I'm going to go give you 3 more slides, and then we're going to have time to ask some questions. So when it does come to logo, there are many things you need to think about, and this is on the more practical side, more on the design side, but let me kind of just jump there for a moment. So when you look at fonts, different fonts have different applications. There's serif fonts, sans serif fonts, script fonts, monospace fonts, decorative fonts. Serif fonts are traditional, sophisticated, reliable, practical, a little bit more formal. Sans serif are more modern, clean, geometric, more contemporary. Scripts are more elegant, more classic for the right kind of application. Monospace scripts are functional, typed, electronic, mechanical kinds of communications, and then the decorative or headlines for emphasis and postcards or greeting cards. What can happen is if you don't use your fonts correctly, then you do not express the heart of your brand effectively. And I have seen many organizations by combining fonts, by using fonts incorrectly, communicate something visually that is totally inconsistent from who they are conceptually and who they are in their heart and in their purpose. The same is true for colors. colors have a variety of meanings, and this is all going to be in the handout that you'll get to download and look over. So different colors communicate different emotions, and so the choice of colors for your organization is important. And if you don't think that there's diversity, I have one more slide just to show you some of the different color emotion guides and how different organizations are using those different colors to communicate what they believe are the most important components of their brand expression. So to do a recap very quickly, you know, a brand comes from the inside out. It comes from understanding your core purpose. It comes from building the right values and then building out the right messaging. It comes from positioning your organization in the minds and the hearts of the people that you touch and expressing that consistently through every experience that they have. And as they do, then you can begin to also communicate it through colors and fonts. And ultimately, you can come to a point of expressing that brand in an effective way. And by doing that, you find that you are communicating at a much higher level than you were able to do previously. So that's the wrap on the presentation, but I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was excellent. Any of you, if you have any questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat panel, and I'll facilitate getting those out here. Mark, I think a number of our people who are here on the webinar today probably struggle some communicating with their leadership about how branding is more than just a logo. And now you've given us lots of great information about that. But how would you boil it down when somebody who's on the communication and marketing team is talking to somebody in the executive leadership team? What's the most important thing that they need to tell them about why a brand matters and why the communications department has an important role in establishing that?
Well, I think it comes back to understanding the core purpose and addressing the core purpose. In fact, we're working with a large organization right now that we've been doing consulting work for them, and we were meeting with them just a few weeks ago, and they have so many different reaches that are going on. They have all these programs that are reaching different people groups in different areas and using different channels to do it. And my observation as I sat through a day of meetings with various members of staff was, what you're doing is phenomenal, but it's not consistent. The messaging is not consistent. And the heart of this organization is so powerful, but it's not being expressed consistently. And so when I sat down with the president of the organization, that was exactly what I said. I love your organization. I love your people. I love your passion. I love the programs. But there's disconnects. And he said, you know, you're right. And things are happening that don't relate to each other. And it's like silos have grown up all over our campus. And so I said, well, you know, if we approach the branding messaging correctly with the people that are involved, we can bring all those silos together so that they're all talking to each other and so that you're communicating in a consistent way. He said, let's do it. That's how quick it happened. Because I think leaders understand the importance of a consistent, clear message. And oftentimes they don't understand, or they haven't realized, or they haven't acknowledged. Sometimes they realize it, but don't acknowledge it, that silos have occurred and that mission drift has occurred or messaging drift has occurred. And so I think as a communications person, that would be the first thing I would say. We need to make sure that all of our communicators are on the same page. Several years ago, we worked with a large missions organization that had international offices, and their support was waning. And part of that was because it was a denominational organization. And part of that was because there was lack of clarity in their communication. That was a big piece of it. They didn't have a clear brand established. They had always sort of been there. And so they just kind of went with the fact we've always been here. And then there were churches that were doing direct funding and not going through the channels. And so we had to create kind of a whole new expression. That was very interesting because in that dynamic, first we had to get the US group to come to agreement. That took some doing till we kind of had a brand that was okay with the US. And then they shared it with their people in the field. And the people in South America said, this isn't going to work for us. The people in Asia said, this isn't going to work for us. So we had to then bring all of those people together to talk about, okay, how do we get the core purpose expressed culturally in all of these different settings in a way that is consistent across the platform? It took us 2 years to go through the whole process. But at the end, the change was explosive. The level of funding was explosive. The level of engagement, people's interest and engagement was significantly higher. And it was a win-win-win all the way around, even though it was a hard process, took a lot of work, but it was worth it because they got the brand right and it's now being executed consistently.
That's excellent. Thank you, Mark. Let me ask you another question. I think it kind of dovetails with what you're just describing, but you were describing a denominational mission that had offices in multiple places.
Yep.
A lot of our folks work for mission agencies that are interdenominational, and I've heard people describe their wider missionary staff as like freelance volunteers. And so it can be, there's one thing about getting everybody in your office kind of on board, like your headquarters office, but then there's also your field staff. And if everyone feels like they're a freelance volunteer, even in your main office, that can have an impact on culture where people kind of have this bit of independence you don't see maybe in more hierarchical organizations. What's something that people can do in an environment like that to help get everyone on board?
Well, I think oftentimes you have the independent operators operating independently because there's nothing in place that they feel good about. And so oftentimes if an organization will create good tools and customizable tools that they can use that consistently reflect that brand, the independent people in the field will then engage and incorporate them. We're involved right now in helping with a major event that's happening with regard to Israel. And part of what we were doing is helping them create materials that multiple organizations across the US and even around the world can just download, customize, and use for their own promotions and marketing. And what we're finding is because the materials have been created, they look good, they're easy to use, people are using them. And it's keeping everything on message because it came from a central core message point, but everybody is able to personalize it so it reflects that it's coming from them. So I think creating the right tools can make a big difference.
That's excellent. I like your idea there of just providing people with something that's very easy for them to use so that, you don't have to have the debate about it. Just like, here it is. You can use this.
Right. And some will choose not to. And you will have those. But I think the more they see that it's effective and it's well thought out and it's well prepared, people are looking for the resources. So if you become the source of those resources, I think they'll engage.
We have a question here from Gwen. She's asking, you mentioned that consistent branding takes sacrifice. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. In order to be consistent and clear and intentional, it means you have to make choices. So it means that you can't be everything to everyone. I use the illustration of coffee that I even have my coffee cup right here, folks, that I like coffee. I drink coffee most of the day, probably a lot more. I've been drinking coffee since I was a little kid. Anyway, I love coffee and I know good coffee. And so that's my consistent brand experience. Tea's okay. My wife, however, hates coffee. She doesn't like the smell of coffee. She's a tea drinker. So it's okay. I don't want to try to make my coffee smell and feel like tea for her. It's okay for her not to like what I drink. And that's, I think, somewhere, especially in Christian organizations, we try so hard to meet every need, to be everything to all people. And in doing that, you dilute your brand and lose your effectiveness. So the sacrifice is really defining and realizing that when you make that clear, articulate, thoughtful statement of this is who we are, some people are going to say, oh, I'm not interested. And that's okay, because other people will say, oh, I didn't realize that, and I am interested. I have a just very quick case in point. I had a client one time that said they wanted to do marriage ministry. It was a pastor that had retired, wanted to do marriage ministry. So we had come up with a brand and a name and all that they were going to start this whole new ministry on. And so we were en route getting it all prepared, and I got a phone call. And I said, you know, we were thinking about this, and it's really not just marriage. It's really more family ministry. It's really about families, not just couples. So we want to make this more family ministry. Can we adapt it? Okay, so we adapted. So we made some changes, and another couple of days go by, and they said, well, you know, it's not just about families. It's also about parenting. Can we expand it so we include that? Okay, we're stretching now. And then they came back and said, we feel like we're disenfranchising single people. And we know that single people have relational issues too. So by that time we got there, the brand had been so diffused, it failed. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it failed because they were unwilling to define it clearly. They kept moving it. And as they did, it lost its intensity and lost its, therefore, value. So did that help? Oh.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Someone had a question up here, but it has disappeared. So since we
yeah
Glency says got it. Yep, you got to make choices. Don't dilute your brand. Absolutely. That is a good life lesson for individuals too.
It is. Be who you are, and don't try to be everything for everyone. Yeah.
We don't have any other particular questions, but is there anything else, Mark, that we haven't already talked about that you want to leave our audience with before we wrap up? And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them.
I think oftentimes people don't realize how powerful defining the right brand message can be. One of the exercises I mentioned about the brand values, that defining just a small group of 3 to 5 core values. One of the things that we do in our process is we have people give us what they think their values are for their organization. And so if we have 6 people in a room that are doing that, we end up usually having 25 or 30 different values on the board that we have to now bring down to 5. So think about the communication impact that has. So prior to defining it, if you talk to those 6 people, you would get 6 different descriptions of the values of that organization. When we were done, they had all agreed on 3 core values that would be consistent. And so we now have said, okay, all communications is going to reflect these 3 values. So now it's much more clear, it's much more intense, and it's much more effective. Years ago, back in 2006, that's a long time ago, we were working with the Israeli government in the tourism department. And one of the things that we came across when we went in there, they really didn't understand how to communicate the value of visiting Israel to Christians. So we went through our process and we created a Christian brand for Israel. And what it did is we defined it down, and we came up with 12 conversation points that became our messaging guideline for everything we did for Israel. The period of time that we worked with them, the tourism exploded within the Christian community. And I believe a lot of it had to do with the fact that we finally articulated what the value of visiting Israel was, and in a way that really resonated with the body of Christ. And I think when you are able to articulate it clearly and everybody says the same thing. One of the components of that, and this is the point I was getting to. I went a long way around the barn to get there. The point I was getting to is that one of the components was that the promise was, when you visit Israel, you'll never be the same. And we noticed after about a year, 18 months of this campaign running, everybody who was talking about Israel said, I went to Israel and I'll never be the same. Because it began to be the way it was articulated. You've probably heard people say that very statement. Well, that was something that came out of the brand messaging, and it was memorable, it was easy, and it was true. And so it resonates even today.
Excellent. We have two other questions, but let me get to Daniel's first. How can we position our brand humbly in relation to the broader mission of God, not placing it above the Missio Dei? So I think just that idea, mission agency is, we're participating together. We're not in competition like Coke and Pepsi. We're all participating together in what God is doing. So how do you approach that kind of branding differently?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it isn't competitive branding, certainly, but there is distinctive. I believe that God gives unique assignments. My position has been, if you have a street corner in a city and you have 4 churches on the 4 corners of that street intersection, and each of those churches were fulfilling God's assignment correctly, there would be no competition between those 4 churches. They would each be expressing worship and fellowship and service in unique ways that God wanted to have expressed in that community. So I think expressing that in response to your question, Daniel, I think certainly we want to recognize that we're all part of this Great Commission mission, but there are distinctives. There's a unique call on your organization's charter and life and leadership. And so it's defining it within that, not so much in terms of competition, but in terms of understanding uniqueness and distinctives and perhaps unique targeting, unique methodology, unique communication strategy, whatever that unique thing would be. And then that becomes where your brand, that's why the understanding the core is so important first. Otherwise, you do get into this competitive thing. But if you start with the core purpose, then everything flows out of that.
I like that. So it's communicating, like, what's your unique role within the whole, not saying we are the whole.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have another question from Bev. She says, we are an organization who serves in one region of the world, but is funded in the US. I believe we have the same branding across our organization, but our identity is different. Oh, I see. So they're like serving in one part of the world, but they're getting all of their funding from the US. We have different logos, same colors and fonts. I am thinking this might need to change. What do you think about that?
I think that would be something I'd like to discuss more detail offline, because it's a little, there's a lot to that. So I can unpack that a couple of different ways. We've worked with one organization that does have one name, one brand in the US and another brand in India. This was in India. Yep. And they're very different organizations. They're 2 different, but one feeds the other. We have another group of organizations work with it, like our American Friends of an organization overseas. So we see it done different ways. And there are pros and cons. That's why I think it's. I'd love to have an offline conversation with Bev, and maybe I can specifically answer the question, because I think I don't think there's a single answer. I think it depends on some of the dynamics involved.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, what's a way that people can connect with you?
The easiest way is either through our website or directly by email. Mark, M-A-R-K, at infinityconcepts.com. Mark, M-A-R-K, at infinityconcepts.com. There you go. It's in the chat. Yeah. You're very quick, Heather.
Those typing classes in high school have always been useful.
That's right.
I don't think that we have any other questions. Any last other things, Mark, you'd like to say?
No, this is listen. This has just been an honor to be here and be able to share, and hopefully this won't be the last time. I hope that we'll have opportunity to talk about other things. We love the kingdom of God. We love serving the kingdom of God, and we appreciate all that each of you do in your roles to broadcast and proclaim and declare the gospel worldwide. So whatever we can do to help, we certainly would love to continue to work with you. And thank you, Heather, for your hosting and your invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for your participation. I'm going to turn my camera off here so we can do our closing announcements.
Okay, I'll do the same.